Hi, so I'm Lukas Biewald. I'm the CEO and founder of CrowdFlower, and it's exciting to be here. Actually, I remember when I started the company, Panos is also starting his blog at the same time, and I've been a huge fan of his blog, and I've read it for years. And it's funnily named Behind Enemy Lines, I think is an interesting name for a blog of a professor. You should all check out his blog. And so I run a company, CrowdFlower, and we're kind of a classic Silicon Valley startup at a growth stage with about 100 people, mostly based in San Francisco. And what we do is we manage an online crowdsourced workforce of over 5 million people that log in and do tasks for our customers. And I always like to say when I give a talk, if you're on your laptop and I'm boring you at all, I would be so much happier if you became the 5 million and first worker, and you can actually make some money and probably get a better idea of what CrowdFlower does than listening to me. So feel free to go to crowdflower.com and log in and do some tasks. And so what I love about CrowdFlower and what I love about the kind of online work industry in general is I think there's an amazing chance to unlock the potential of the billions of people that are moving online. And I really, really want to help companies do things that they would never do before and give everyone in the world with access to the internet access to work, because more and more people are getting that access. I think there's a broader trend of companies moving from giving most of their work to employees to sending more work to contractors, to sending more and more stuff outside the boundaries of their company. Accenture, I was just talking to their CTO who's talking about kind of the boundless, boundaryless enterprise, which I think is a great term for a big trend that's happening for all companies. And I think that this kind of crowdsourcing is a huge part of this phenomenon, where you actually don't need 2.5 billion people to do your tasks, but if you can find the perfect person to do your task, well, that's an amazing thing, right? The optimal person for any particular thing that you want to accomplish is probably not someone that works for you, just probabilistically speaking, right? You only have a few hundred people or a few thousand people in your company, and there's billions of people available. And the key things that you need to solve is you need to find that person, you need to explain to that person what you want them to do, and you need to make sure they actually do a good job. And so that's what CrowdFlower does for our segment of the industry. We have maybe less customers than other crowdsourcing companies, but our customers tend to be very big and very engaged and send lots of work through our system. And our typical customer is doing something that we've started to call data refinement. So this is a phenomenon that I think every company has, where you get more and more data, and it turns out you have some kind of mess, and you need to clean up that data. And this could be as varied as we work with satellite companies that get pixels from their satellites, and they want to sell to their customers insights, right? So they might want to say, we want to track the number of containers on a ship, and so someone has to actually look at those pixels and decide how many containers are on a ship. It's actually a harder vision problem than you'd expect. Another common thing is companies with huge customer databases have a really hard time cleaning them up. So a really concrete example, and one of the companies that we could talk about is Autodesk, has over 1 million customers, which I think is amazing. And they're all around the world, and they will decide to do things like, okay, we want to have a new kind of categorization system so we can really effectively compensate our sales force based on what we're trying to accomplish. So they don't want to use just the government codes or the codes that they can buy from a major provider. They want to have their own unique taxonomy. And so what they do with us, and I think this is maybe a little different than how like Odesk or Mechanical Turk would look at it, we don't give them direct access to our workforce. They go through our platform. And what our platform does is it takes each individual record that they want updated or augmented in some way, and it parcels it out, right? So all 1 million customers would create an individual record, and Japanese companies would go to people in Japan or people that we have reason to believe can speak Japanese. French companies would go to people in France or people that we think can speak French. And then it might even go to multiple people, right? So if someone answers the question and we're not sure, if you just log in today and you start categorizing some of these businesses, we'll probably have a second person or a third person check that data to make sure that's really good. Right? And what happens is you can actually take complete control over the cost-quality trade-off for yourself. Right? So you can decide, I can pay more for really high-quality results, or I can pay less for less mission-critical results. And so what's amazing about this is once you set it up, you can do it in real time. So as customers ask for white papers or sign into platform, you can actually populate jobs. And lots of our customers do this, where they'll immediately populate a job, and that business will get categorized. We'll add metadata, like maybe their Twitter account or their Facebook account. And in real time, it'll get sent back into their CRM with that updated information. The whole process can take 10 to 20 minutes. I really love to show examples of what our platform really looks like to make this really tangible. So this is a real job running for one of our customers. And the x-axis here is hours, right? So you can see they've set up a job. They've paid $5,600, and they have a continuous flow of people coming in and doing those tasks. And they can get insights into how many people are passing. In this case, they've set up a quiz that people need to answer before they get into the system. And so they can see the funnel of people getting the quiz correct or getting it incorrect. And they can see there's a continuous flow of people getting graded. And they can see how many people are kind of passing that or getting rejected. And they can also actually see the contributors working on their tasks, how they feel about the task, right? So they actually take exit surveys when they leave the task, and so they can get direct feedback on how well the job is working. This is an example of something a worker would see that you would see if you're logged in. This is someone rating the results of a local search engine, saying, are these good results or not? So you can see down here is the interface where they answer it, and up here is some data that lets them that gives them context to answer a question. And so our customers actually literally will use our tool to set up these types of tasks. This is another example of categorizing products, I believe. And one of the really important things that we've learned, just to give one example of how we manage quality, and actually relates to what Panos was talking about, is test questions. So we found that a really good way to allow yourself a really wide funnel of workers is to set up questions where you know what the answer is, and just make sure that they're answering those questions the way you want them to, right? Then you can give almost everybody access to your test questions and let through the people that answer them correctly. This is actually harder than it looks. So we found when customers set up 100 test questions, on average, they'll mislabel a few of them, and a few of them will have ambiguous instructions where actually a smart person, motivated person couldn't get them correct. And then a few of them will actually be really good examples of tricky edge cases, right? So there might be, I've often learned with addresses, depending on what you're trying to do, different addresses make sense, right? So you might want the mailing address, you might want the physical address, and each customer has a different notion of what they want. So setting up test questions that kind of test these edge cases are great, but then you also need to take out questions where workers are complaining or contesting them and iterate on your job to get really high quality results. We also give people access to lots of different validators and tools that make sure that the results are good. So that's sort of, these are two of many different tools that our customers use to make sure they get good quality results. I view what we're doing is automating not just the process of finding someone, but automating the process of managing them well, right? Setting good expectations and making sure that people are meeting those expectations. And so that is really what our software platform does for our customers. But the more fun thing is to tell you about the things people do with this, right? So I think one really cool example, this is a startup, but they've actually been growing a lot, and we can see that from the volume of stuff they send us, is Delectable. So anybody heard of Delectable? Anybody use it? No? Delectable. Yeah, so it's actually an iPhone app where you can take a picture of a bottle of wine, and they recommend other wines. And so this actually, when you take a picture, they tried to use OCR, but wines are, OCR is pretty good, but wine's actually particularly tricky for machine vision to transcribe because they'll use these funny fonts and they have kind of funny words in the names. So when you take a picture of your wine, it actually populates a little task that gets done by someone maybe halfway around the world. And then you get back the name of the wine, and they can actually recommend other good wines. And this has been a real driver of user happiness for them, and delivers a really magical experience for their customers. Another great example is, there's lots and lots of apps in the iPhone App Store, and one thing you might not know is Apple actually requires everyone that accepts user-generated content to moderate that content, right? Which is really, it's easy for a big company, but tricky for a little company, right? So if you have users uploading 5 images a day, no outsourcing company will touch that, right? No, you can't staff for that, right? And then, one day, you get your crowdfunding campaign starts working, and you get tons and tons of users, right? And then you need to have a system ready to deal with that. So we integrated with Parse, and with just this amount of code, you can actually set up a system where human beings really check every photo that your users upload and make sure that the content's good. And so this has been a really popular thing with indie developers to give them access to the same tools that a Google might have to keep them in the App Store and keep Apple from complaining without a huge overhead fixed cost. Another cool example is retail geofencing. I just think this is really neat, right? Where they take satellite photos and pick out exactly where the stores are, so that this company can give people information when they walk inside the store and actually send that to their cell phone. And here's a case where we aggregate. Each thing has a different notion of aggregation. So when multiple people put in GPS locations, you aggregate that differently than if somebody's categorizing businesses. You don't just probably pick the most common, because no one will actually say the center of this business is the same. So in this case, you kind of average them in an interesting way. Another really meaningful example of this was actually after the earthquake in Haiti a few years ago. So we had just started to build the system, and there were a really smart nonprofit set up a text messaging service on the ground where people could text. Hey, I'm trapped under a building, or hey, like someone near me is going into labor. But the people were texting in Creole. And so they actually went to Google and said, hey, do you have a translator? And Google said, this is actually a really difficult problem, because not only is Creole kind of a funny language that we don't have a lot of data on, but the text message Creole is even harder, right? So they said, wow, we need a whole ton of translators to deal with all these text messages, right? So you have the same issues with you want it to happen in real time, and you want the translations to be really good, so you don't necessarily want to open it up for the whole world to come in. And so they ended up using our platform to do these translations here and actually locate exactly where on the map the disaster is happening, which is a great example of how powerful the service is, right? Because you could never staff enough people to always be ready to do Creole translations when there's a disaster. But right when it happens, this kind of platform lets you scale up really fast. And when I talk to business people, I say, you might have the same issue if you have a B2C application, where you never know when suddenly there's going to be tons and tons of people coming into your to your application. Another really exciting example that's been taking off for us is actually medical research. So we see a lot of vision-related issues in medicine, where people want to label the cells on a slide or neurons or things like that. And it turns out that often these tasks are actually better done by our workforce, which is super careful, than by graduate students who can be less careful. And I just think another really cool example, so this is just a great example from the NIH that was actually taking drug descriptions and asking, what does this actually mean? Which is an example where you might not necessarily want the most sophisticated person doing the task. You might want to ask, hey, can someone actually understand what these drug warnings actually mean? We can also do some amount of targeting. In fact, we have a customer that's doing diagnoses, which I'm not sure if that's a perfect application of our system right now. But with test questions, you can actually measure if it's working or not. But this is a great use of when you'd actually want lots of people to weigh in on something you're trying to accomplish. And then this is the Autodesk example. Again, this is kind of the typical commercial example that we give. And so people always ask me kind of who are these people that do this work? Who is this crowd? And it's amazing the diversity of the crowd. We work with it's completely global. We have people in every country, and we have actually over 1 million people in the United States doing it of kind of all ages and backgrounds. And so I would recommend that you should sign up for the crowd and become one of our workers. Thanks.